I'm surprised he didn't have cash falling out of his sleeve.
He might have. It was true pandemonium.
It's the stuff that just continues today.
Cash was being handed out left and right.
What are they missing?
But if you string it all together, it's one big story.
Wow, this person is something special. Welcome to The Takeaway. I'm Alex Maragos. Here at The Takeaway, we're hoping to have approachable conversations with expert journalists about the biggest stories in Chicago and beyond. We're going for three things here: what we know, how we know that, and why it matters to you. Now, when you think about Chicago and themes, you probably think about a bunch of different things. Maybe you think hot dogs, basketball, Al Capone. Maybe you think corruption, because there's been a lot of it in Chicago and Illinois over the years. And here with us today as a guest, we have a man who has chronicled that in a whole new way for the Chicago Tribune. We have Ray Long, investigative reporter for the Chicago Tribune, with us. Ray, welcome to The Takeaway.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
You came up, and you and your team at the Chicago Tribune came up with Culture of Corruption. I've actually got it right here. This was the first story that you guys did in August of 2024. And you looked at why Illinois is the way it is, with so many stories of corruption over the years. So if I was stuck with you in an elevator for 30 seconds or so, and I say, Ray, why does Illinois have so much corruption? What's your answer?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. One is that there is a culture. Not only do we put it in the title, but there's a culture out there of people just expecting corruption. And a lot of people just think, well, you know, I can slip a guy a 10 here and get my driver's license cleared or something like that. That used to go on forever here in the city, but it also happened at higher levels. And we saw that people would go into office, and if they weren't corrupt, they might end up being corrupt. So they were affected by this overall feeling and environment and this whole thing that brought them into this whole cultural corruption problem.
If you've been doing this for a long time and you've seen so many stories, do you ever just get grossed out by the level of corruption that you read about and look at and you see? I mean, it is just, in some stories, absolutely shameless.
Yeah, it's just amazing what they'll go to in some lengths. You know, you've got the Ed Burke situation here, where you actually heard the tapes of him shaking people down. And it was amazing that not only that he was doing it, but he was so casual about it. And then you've got the more sophisticated level, where you have a Mike Madigan who has layers of people in between him and what may be going down. And you understand that he doesn't say too much, and yet when he went to federal court, they finally said he went too far.
Now, you went back in culture of corruption 150 some years.
Yeah, to the founding of the city in 1837, yeah.
I mean, what did you find out about how bad it was then? Is it better now? And how has it changed along the way?
You know, the funny thing here, Alex, is just 7 years after Chicago was founded, they had to throw out a mayoral election because there were all kinds of questions about the voter fraud and whether the judges were stuffing things and whether they were corrupt or partisan. And they had to take up in what they called then the Common Council, the forerunner to the city council. And they finally voted to throw out the election, have another one. And
feels like we were destined for this when you say something like that.
Yeah. Then, you know, then there was, in the 1860s, there was a contract let to paint what was then City Hall and the courthouse complex, or the county complex rather. And 13 county commissioners and aldermen got indicted because they were taking bribes to give this one contract away, and they were just, it turned out they weren't painting, they were using like white chalk.
13, were there any left? Because 13's a lot.
That's a lot. And I don't know how many were left at that time, but man, it just is ingrained.
How come nobody has stepped up, or those that have stepped up, how come there has been more support to get rid of this system? Because we laugh about it, and some of the stories just have genuine humor, but there's serious problems we're talking about here.
Right, and it costs taxpayers too.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think what happens is lawmakers, aldermen, they get in in the system that is there. And then they decide, well, hey, this is not a bad system for me, and it helps me keep my job, and therefore, why change it? And then there is heavy resistance on things. One of the things that struck me in doing this was we were looking at other states, and they have the ability for their prosecutors to do wiretapping, and federal prosecutors do wiretapping. We hear the tapes and the voices of all the public officials who have got caught up over there in federal court. But Illinois actually has a law that says you cannot use wiretapping in public corruption cases. So that it's one of only a handful or less that are like that in the country.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, you hear stuff like that and you almost think, well, they're doing that on purpose to protect themselves.
It is basically a protection thing, and that's a lot of it is protection. They have protection and favors for their own people. For example, when you have the revolving door clause in the state for lobbyists. So a lawmaker works and then he goes and becomes a lobbyist. If he quits 6 months before the end of his term, he has to wait 6 months. But if he finishes his term, he can start the next day. And we had a guy just a year ago who left prison for public corruption and then was signed up as a lobbyist down in Springfield within a couple of weeks. So you think, man, that is not the way it should be. Some states have like a 6-year ban before you can roll into a lobbyist.
Well, every city has aldermen or councilmen or whatever you call it. Every state has legislatures. Every state has lobbyists.
Yeah, absolutely.
But for whatever reason in Illinois, it just gets so tainted by the history and this culture. It just never ceases to amaze me. And what I love about the series, which I encourage everybody to check out on the Tribune website, 10 pieces?
Yeah, it's a 10-parter.
Yeah.
And
so maybe don't read it all at once. It's going to take you a while. But
there's actually a site for that. It's chicagotribune.com/corruption.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I was equally infuriated and entertained all at the same time because of some of the stories. But it's not a history piece. It's not, here's the things that happen and they're done.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the stuff that just continues today.
Right.
And I also came away thinking, okay, federal prosecutors in this area have been doing a lot, cleaning up a lot. But then you read how many goes on and you're thinking, well, what are they missing?
Well,
what are they not getting to?
Absolutely. And because the federal prosecutors end up with so many cases, the local prosecutors don't pursue them as aggressively. And you got to wonder what they know about that they don't choose, because, the federal prosecutors kind of take the cream of the bad cases, if you can't have cream of bad. But, the other thing is you've got politics involved in a lot of this too. If you're a state's attorney and you need to have the local crew of Democrats, if you're in a Democratic county, you don't want to go making them mad at you, or they might not endorse you for the next round. Same would go for a Republican county, more downstate than ever. But that is one of the things that then the Democrats will say, well, a Republican prosecutor will use it as a weapon and come after us, or the Republicans will say the same thing. So they're afraid to empower the prosecutors or the attorney general with too much power.
But isn't that like just getting mad that there are referees? Like if you're committing a foul, right? If you're committing a crime, you shouldn't be doing that in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm following
absolutely
that logic.
I'm not sure that there's total logic, but there is some.
Got it. This series has over 200 public officials over time, and not just Chicago. This is Illinois in general. Over 200 in varying degrees of corruption, brazen, secret, sophisticated, maybe slipshod, lot of colorful characters.
Oh yeah.
Mostly men.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you pick out a couple that just when you were doing the research, you go, wow, this person is something special?
Yeah, well, it's hard to narrow it.
I bet it is.
But one that people might not have heard about is a guy named William Lorimore. He was a U.S. Senator back at the time when states chose their senators by having the legislators.
Yeah, people
choose
didn't
them.
pick them, the
Right.
legislators picked them.
Voters did not pick
Okay.
them. So Laura Moore makes it to the U.S. Senate, and then there's an investigation. How did he get there anyway? Well, they found out that there was a lot of bribes going in Springfield, and those bribes ended up paying his way into the U.S. Senate, and he got kicked out of the U.S. Senate. And shortly after that, there was a change in the U.S. Constitution to put the power of choosing the U.S. senators into the hands of voters. So, I guess we had a reform.
So Illinois did that.
Yeah. Most not for noble reasons, I guess.
Right.
But,
Gosh. I was struck by Paul Powell,
Yeah.
one of the people. I'm just going to read it here. It is just phenomenal detail.
Yeah.
Former Illinois House Speaker, elected Democratic Secretary in state in 1964. In 1970, he died on an out-of-state trip with his secretary, and inside his regular hotel suite at the St. Nicholas Hotel, $750,000 was found strewn around in whiskey crates, strong boxes, I don't know what strong boxes are, old clothes, and perhaps the ultimate and most infamous emblem of Illinois politics, a shoebox stuffed with cash and 50 grand found in his state office. I mean, you think, I'm surprised he didn't have cash falling out of his sleeve.
He might have.
Yeah.
He might have. That's the 1970. Think about how much that's worth today. That would be millions.
Right.
And so he was never indicted because he died.
And
But nobody knew about it. It was so common that, cash was being handed out left and right.
I like this last detail. Even though his annual salary never topped $30,000, his estate amounted to more than $3.5 million.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, that is really amazing. There was another scandal before him with a guy named Orwell Hodge. He was the state auditor.
Yeah.
And he was caught skimming right out of the till.
So this is the auditor is the guy who's in charge of making sure everything's on the up and up.
Right. He's kind of the watchdog, and he was putting it in and taking it out a little faster coming out too. He even came in for a new appropriation to boost the amount of money his office was getting, and so he went to the slammer obviously, but it is just an amazing run, and that led later to a change in the Illinois Constitution where they have a comptroller and a treasurer. So they have somebody, looking at the bills, somebody taking them in, two separate offices.
So you've covered in the series, there are fathers and sons.
Yes.
Who have both.
Yes.
You've had people who have been good government advocates
Right.
for a part of their career who ended up taking bribes.
Right.
So it really shows that it touches both parties,
Yes.
every corner of the state.
Yes.
You did aldermen, city officials, state officials. Is there any one agency or one part of Illinois government that seems to be the most corrupt historically?
Well, historically, the city council is doing very well. Take for example, there's nearly 40 aldermen who have been to prison in the last 50 or so years, and so that's a pretty good track record or bad track record again. But Springfield seems to be putting the pedal down on putting people, out of office and go into the prison. And, Mike Madigan, of course, is the latest, but there have been several others who have gone there now. And we even have a pending case with a state senator, a sitting state senator, Emil Jones III, who is the son of former Senate President Emil Jones Jr., who was never convicted of anything. But, the idea that it just continues here is just remarkable.
When you look back, has it gotten better over time, or is it always the same as it's always been?
I was down there in the early 80s. 1981 was when I started, and it was fast and loose for sure then. And before that, a few years before, Paul Simon was a state senator.
Not the singer.
Right. Although they did appear together one time on Saturday Night Live.
Okay, how about that?
But Paul Simon wrote about how the cold cash went from one hand to the other, from a lobbyist to a lawmaker. And he wrote this big expose for a national magazine. He ended up getting the Benedict Arnold Award from his fellow lawmakers because that again kind of explains they don't like it when people expose them or when people shine the light on them. So we haven't seen much movement, even though we've been elevating these issues in the paper and offering various solutions too.
You wrote a book about Mike Madigan. You just touched
Sure.
on him a second ago. I got it right here. I'll just hold it up for people to see it. Yeah, the house that Madigan built, the so-called Velvet Hammer, because he liked soft power.
Yeah.
And it all came crashing down. So tell me about writing this book, covering him, what you learned about this man and his downfall.
Well, the amazing thing is that he got so much power there, and it's hard to really quantify because everything usually went through Madigan. Because if you pass a bill, it has to go through both chambers. If a governor wants a program, it has to pass through both chambers. So he used that to the max. And when he would get a bill, he was one of these guys who worked extremely hard. And I mean, I remember one time there was an end of session party that went all night, and I went to that, and then I stopped by the office at like 7:30 in the morning, and just to leave a message. Speaker Madigan picked up. You know, he was already there working away just on cleanup. The session had finished. But he also was able to know the rules so well that anytime you go to a ball game out at White Sox Stadium, you can say, thank you, Mike Madigan, because that wouldn't have happened if he hadn't been able to bend the rules. That's one of the funniest
What rule did he
stories.
bend on that one?
Well, the legislation to have the White Sox stadium built had to be passed by midnight on June 30th. If it didn't pass by then, it would have taken an extraordinary 3/5 vote. So it just needed a simple majority then. So, you know, it looked like it wasn't going to happen. Then Governor Jim Thompson at the time, a Republican, decided, no, we got to keep these guys here. So he worked all day trying to get the Senate to approve it. They finally approved it 20 minutes to midnight. The House goes over, they're yelling and screaming. Everybody's going crazy. The opponents are singing, na, 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 hey. And the whole thing is crazy. They're reciting as if they were in Times Square, 10, 9.
Right.
And then they had the majority leader in the speaker's chair, and he says, okay, take the record, and there were 6 votes short. And most of the time you think, well, you know,
That's it.
That's it. And the TV cameras from Florida, where they hope to get the team to go, were going, hey, the White Sox are coming to Florida, the White Sox are coming to Florida. But in Illinois, a lot of strange things can happen. And so the guy in the chair, the majority leader, starts calling on people and saying, you want to change your vote? You want to change your vote? Madigan and Thompson are running around twisting arms, and everybody is standing up and yelling. It was true pandemonium. And so then they get the 60th vote, and the majority leader says at 11:59, the bill passes. And so what happened was we ran up and grabbed copies of the roll call, and it said 1203 on it. But Thompson and Madigan said, well, you know, no judge in the land is going to say that that counts. It'll be how the legislature ruled it. And that's exactly what happened. So you've got the White Sox Stadium because Madigan knew how to play the game.
Bending time in the State House.
Yeah.
That is something you witnessed with your own eyes.
Oh, yeah.
When it came to this series in this book, how do you know what you know? How did you come to find out all the things about these various people?
Well, I covered Springfield for over 40 years off and on, full time down there for, you know, more than a quarter of a century. And I'd go down and cover it intermittently during various sessions. And so, you know, it became a passion for me to learn more and more about it. I covered City Hall too in the 90s. So I was familiar with those characters too. So you just learn a lot. And then you think, man, this story needs to be told, because we cover it you and I cover it daily, you know, and it comes in and out and it goes, and then you hear about the next indictment.
The next guy,
you move
the next
on.
guy, the next.
And it's episodic. But if you string it all together, it's one big story. And that's what we wanted to tell. And we wanted to get into, you know, why it was happening. And that's something we tried to do.
And that's something I caught when I was going through the series.
Yeah.
And I think it just confirmed, especially in the latest convictions for Madigan and Burke specifically, it confirmed the suspicions of so many people. And I'm sure so many people in Illinois have stories like that over the decades.
Yeah.
I knew that person was crooked. I knew that.
Yeah.
So why didn't they do this or that or take him down? What are the similarities that you see between all these people? Because they have wildly different stories.
Oh, yeah.
They come from all kinds of backgrounds.
Oh, yeah.
What's the through line between all these people?
I think a lot of them just find they can push it a little bit, and they find they can push it a little bit more, and they see the lines, or they draw the lines, and they know where to bend the lines, and then they cross over them. At some point, they think they're getting away with enough, and they think nobody's going to catch them. And then the next guy thinks they're smarter than the last guy, and it just keeps catching up to him.
And I get that a lot of people are listening to this or have seen the stories over the years and go, all right, I've given up.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Oh, yeah.
Or it's unfixable. They're always going to be that way because they've always been that way.
Yeah.
Why do you think it matters, not just to people in Illinois? Why should we care? Why should we really care about
Well, it does make a difference in who is running the place. I mean, you can look at Springfield, or you can look at Washington, and you can have differences of opinions on how ideologically people are handling things, or whether you think somebody's crossed the line. And I think that it's important that we have integrity in our public officials. And I think we all benefit when they're straight up and treat issues that with an eye toward everybody and with an eye toward the best for everybody. And so when you have folks who get in it and then they start doing things for themselves, and they take that power and use it to benefit themselves and their friends, then you will see that it's unfair to the rest of the people. And I'm just a downstate guy who grew up thinking, this was all on the square. But it turns out, hey, it's not. It depends on who's your person in charge, or who's got the power.
Yeah. All right. So Ray, we've identified the problems substantially. If you had a magic wand, or if a good governance person had a magic wand and say, okay, here's 3, 4, 5 things we could fix, and they would really make a difference.
Yeah.
What are those things?
Well, for one thing, it's difficult to get into the ballot or on the ballot in Illinois. It's
new people, new candidates.
Yeah, it's set up so that the establishment politicians have almost all of the leverage. Neophytes come into this system and they collect what they think are enough signatures to get on the ballot, and then the establishment party folks will know all kinds of ways to knock all these signatures out, and next thing you know, you're not on the ballot. That's one thing that could be fixed there. There's several ways to fix that. Another thing that could be fixed is they have this campaign contribution cap, and it sets limits on how much people can give, but then the candidates themselves can blow through the caps, and then all systems are off, man.
So if I blow the cap, you can, if we're running against each other and I blow the cap, you can also then spend more.
Right. And so there are practically no caps when that happens. And so there has to be some way to tighten that down. There are things like legislative inspector generals. They are overseen by the lawmakers themselves, and they can't go too far, and they're not given much room to roam. So even though we've had lawmakers go into federal court, we don't see them turn up in the legislative inspector general reports because they're so constrained. So free them up. And, we talked about wiretapping. Maybe that's something we should take up and allow local prosecutors, local authorities to do. There's many, many more things, but those are some of the highlights.
So because it seems like the Tribune could have published this anytime between 18... When did Chicago start? 1820?
1847.
47, and now.
Yeah.
Why now? Why did you guys come out with it in August last year?
The truth is I've been pushing to do this for years.
Yeah.
And they finally wore down and let me do it. So we started, actually, I started putting together that list of 200 or so back in November of 23, you know, and it was while Ed Burke was on trial, actually, and I was covering that, and in between I was starting to gather these things, and we were counting all the aldermen at that point too, just for his trial. And so I think everybody finally realized that it's not going to stop unless we try to expose it. And if we can expose it, then the next step is that the politicians have to do something to close all these loopholes in the laws or escape hatches for, you know, you put down a law, but it doesn't really have any teeth.
The thing you will hear from politicians over and over again is voters don't care about this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Voters don't care about loopholes and lobbyists and this stuff. Are they right?
Well, they may be right. And that, you know, Alex, that's one thing. People have to care, and they have to tell their lawmakers they want changes, or they have to really put the pressure on, you know, the governor or others too, to stand up and say, this has got to stop and this has got to change.
So let's use one example. We got J.B. Pritzker, who we think is the richest elected official in the country, who is popular.
Yeah.
People may not like his politics, not everybody, but he's popular.
Yeah, sure.
May run for president. Why doesn't he take a more forceful stance? Because he doesn't have to be subject to the purse or power of Mike Madigan, certainly not anymore. And he can make his way maybe more than other people could in Illinois. So why doesn't he step up and do it?
It's a puzzle. And he could put his full shoulder into it. And he could make a big contrast between, look, I'm fighting for ethics here in Illinois versus in Congress and in the White House and in the Supreme Court in D.C., things seem to be out of control. There's a lot of questions about the ethics out there. It would be something that he could stand on, but he has not picked up the baton to take this. Now, some people would have said to me that, well, part of the reason is he needs the people that are the guys who need to pass, the men and women who are there in the legislature to pass the programs that he wants. So if you irritate them, they may not play along. Is that it? I don't know. But the reality is there's no big player in Springfield right now with the clout to make things happen who is getting in there and pushing hard to make changes.
So you've worked on the series for over a year. You got the Chronicle, the Dishonor Roll. I like that name, the Dishonor Roll of 200. You wrote this 10-part series. You wrote this book. What is your takeaway sitting here about corruption in Illinois after all this work?
I do think that people have to stand up and they have to say enough. And you come to those points like when Blagojevich was caught in pay-to-play scandals and impeached and thrown out. They made some changes after that, but they weren't full-fledged changes, and they put in these loopholes and escape hatches. So people have to stand up, the lawmakers have to listen, and you really have to care about integrity, and you should. And so when people do that, you can hold their feet to the fire, and hopefully you can make change.
Ray, it's sad to say that I think you're going to be adding to the Dishonor Roll as time goes on, if history serves as any lesson. But good luck with that next story when it comes down the line.
And thank you very much.
And thank you for the time today.
It's been great.
Thank you. Thank you so much for watching The Takeaway. If you liked this video, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode.